So is that Tony Williams?
So it is 1 o'clock, but we don't have a quorum, do we?
Recording? Thank you. All right, everyone, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Executive Board meeting, September 1st, 2022, for Metro Plan, of course. So can we have roll call, please?
Yes, Chair, starting with Chair Jim McCarthy,
I'm here.
Geronimo Vasquez, not present, Patrice Horstman,
Present.
Austin Aslan, also not present, Tony Williams,
Present.
Regina Salas,
Present.
Jesse Thompson. Is not present. And then we have Metro Plan staff, Miles Malbec,
Here?
David Wessel,
Present.
Rosie Ware, that would be me, Mandia Gonzalez here. And we have others in attendance. I see Dana Biskin with Burgess and Nyepel. Is there anyone else? And I'm also bringing in Geronimo Vasquez.
Oh, okay, so these are two.
He's logging in, yes.
Okay. So do we have any public comment today? No.
Chair, no, there's no public comment at this time.
All right, did anyone have any questions or comments about the minutes from the June 2nd meeting? I did not have any changes. Anyone else?
No changes.
Okay, so I'll move to approve the minutes of the regular meeting from June 2nd, 2022. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Patrice Horstman seconded. Any other comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, so those approve unanimously. Okay, we're down to the consent agenda. Rosie Ware is going to talk to us about the Title VI plan.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, one of the reasons we have a consent agenda is to approve items with one vote without discussion. The board can, of course, pull them off
Right,
in discussion, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to
Jesse.
not.
So, well, I read through those. I did have one comment. On page 10, it lists the city engineer as vacant. And then it gives his or her gender and race. So I think that should just be left blank since the city engineer's position is open right now. Did anyone else have any questions or changes? We're on consent item 2A.
Sorry for being late, Chair.
That's all right. We just started,
Oh,
so
okay.
you're fine.
I couldn't get in. I was locked out.
Right.
And I was trying to call in, too. My phone's not going
We
through.
got you in here now, so we're happy.
Yep, okay.
Did anyone else have any comments on the Title VI plan? Could I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the Title VI plan for fiscal year 23.
A second.
And then Regina Salas seconded. Patrice Horstman made the motion. Any other comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And it sounds like Austin Aslan has joined the meeting. All right, no dissent, any dissent? That passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, so we're now on to general business, item 3A. Miles is going to talk to us about the year-end financial report. Miles?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I would like to just do a couple housekeeping items first and recognize that we are in a new location, and some of you know, operating out of
Genesis on again?
state mountain lion facility. And they have some pretty high tech here, so we have something called an owl camera. And also they were just working out some bugs. For example, Mr. Thompson was here on time, but we wasn't able to get into the building. So as we get used to these hybrid meetings, just wanted to let you know that, and I appreciate Mount Lion for hosting us. And I want to recognize that Councilmember Salas and Councilmember Aswin are also at the League of Cities and Towns Conference in Glendale. And really appreciate you being able to dial into this meeting so we could do Metro Plan business today. So thank you all for being here. And with those housekeeping notes, I'll go into what the chair asked me to do. Fiscal year 22 year-end financial report. It's pages 19 to 23 of your packet. And I'm going to just scroll through this quickly. I will tell you, we have a lot to cover today. And the items get more complicated as we go. So the financial report's pretty straightforward. We ended the year, fiscal year 22, as of June 30th, 22, pretty much the way we said we would when we gave you the report, the projection in June. And our administrative budget, basically we're underspent by about 8.6%. So that means salary and benefits, operations, travel, everything was slightly underspent. And then capital projects, which is going down to page 20 of the staff report. And I will tell you, we are always underspent in capital, because what we do is we budget capacity to do a whole bunch of work in the coming year. And then because of lead times and lengths of projects, we generally don't do all of that work and we roll it forward to the next year. However, although that's not a surprise, I wanted to let you know that essentially we very much are tracking to budget. And I wanted to close this out with you because in the next couple of items, I'm going to be giving you financial updates and actually asking you to approve an amended budget. And hopefully by sharing with you that we tracked the budget last year and we actually have in the past couple, it gives you confidence and more confidence in the ability to amend the budget a little bit later in the meeting. And with that, I would just like to open it up for questions or comments, Mr. Chair.
Any questions? I'm not hearing any, and incidentally, I don't have the chat open. I think some other people in the meeting do. So, no.
I'm looking for raised hands and chat, not saying anything.
All right, Miles, we'll move on to item B, which is federal and state funding update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. There's a lot to share here. And Mandy is going to put a PowerPoint presentation up on the screen. And it will track along pretty well with your staff report. But there's so much to share. I wanted to illustrate some of the items visually. So I'm going to give you an update on federal and state funding. And give me 1 second here to adjust my technology. I'll give you an update on federal and state funding. And as you recall, we did a SWOT analysis in April. So that was a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, analysis of how we are doing with federal funding. And so we've been working on that the past few months. And as a quick reminder, I think everybody here really knows the bipartisan infrastructure law was a game changer in a lot of ways and is an unprecedented amount of funding that's been coming out more than in the last 30 years at least. However, one of the themes is that Metro Plan funding and our partners around the state, our peers around the state, have really been flat with funding. There hasn't been an increase. So I'm going to talk about several items in the presentation today. In terms of strengths in the SWOT analysis, some of the things we heard overall, and this was not just about Metro Plan, this was about our region and our member agencies, a lot of good committed staff, agencies work well together, We've got dedicated local match and some major propositions that have been approved, the city particularly. And then there's a lot of clarity in terms of the projects, we know what needs to be done. And if you would go to the next slide, we also have some weaknesses. And I highlighted the 3 that we're going to be able to address today in this staff report and the next. But although staff was identified as a strength, capacity to write grants and deliver projects with all the funding that's coming out was identified as a weakness. Actually, it was the biggest one. 10 people who attended the advance said that. And our solution is to repurpose staff to make sure we're engaging as much as we can, and then hire staff. And the following staff report is going to address the possibility of hiring additional staff. There's a few more bullets here that aren't highlighted. I'll address them more in future meetings. But the idea of us working together and being clear in our priorities in the community, our need to be able to speak to the relationships between housing and transportation, economy, how they all work together. And then cost benefit analysis is one of the very technical and very important aspects of competitive grant writing that we're working on. But for purposes of this meeting today, local match was identified as a risk. So even though, or weakness, even though we have Props 419 and 20 and transit funding, question is local match adequate? And I can tell you it's not. And it's definitely not for MetroPlan because we only have about $30,000 a year of local match as an organization. And then there's a weakness around confusion between agencies. Go, no go on a project and who's working on what. And the solution there is pretty straightforward, just to communicate. So what we are doing today, is part of that process. If you hit the next slide, please. So looking back at federal and state funding, we've had some successes I want to identify. Carbon funding, it's a new program. $360,000 is coming to MetroPlan. It's about 160,000 a year. And we got a lump sum of about 360,000 right off the bat. Also, we had a creative local match grant that was competitive for $160,000. And, I want to point out, these are nice grants to get. They're base hits, I'm calling them, to use a baseball analogy, and maybe even a walk. And I really prefer grand slam home runs. I like the idea of getting millions of dollars all at once. But using that baseball metaphor, we're getting people on base, and you can't get a grand slam unless the bases are loaded, right? So we have people on first and second with these 2 grants. And just to keep that metaphor going, it's really, what do we do next? Who's coming to the plate next? And I'm going to be talking about that here in this meeting and the next staff report in particular. But first, I want to be clear about some of the failures we've experienced as we take inventory. And I know failure is a strong word, and I could make it more gentle, but I'm okay with the word failure. If you're not failing, you maybe not trying anything new. And we tried some things this year, and they were not successful. And they include the Greater Arizona Funding Initiative. It was supposed to be $2.6 million for Lone Tree. That was not successful. So that's coming up for effort again. Community initiatives funding. These are efforts that I personally put forward for planning funding that we did not receive. And then a signal technology grant, smart signals, that we learned we did not receive. And that brings us to current efforts. The directors, and there's just a summary of 6 items that we're working on. And there's a lot of information here that I'm going to give you, and I'm going to go deep on each one and hopefully maintain your interest. If you go to the next slide, you'll see with the director's task force, this has to do with directors, people in my position all over the state, including Maricopa County and Pima County. And we are all getting together to request an increase in funding. And I've brought this to you the past few months. This has been a project for going on 8 or 9 months now. And the feedback I've received is, with all these graphs and spreadsheets and resolutions, it's pretty complicated, it's pretty long, it's pretty bureaucratic. So we've simplified it, and we're just looking to send a letter to the ADOT director. And some of the key points here is that the bipartisan infrastructure law, it increased funds to the state by over, could you hit the next slide, please? $137 million in 2022 alone, just in 1 year. And surface transportation block grant funds, so you'll see this STDG acronym a bit. Those funds directly to ADOT increased by 40 million over 10 years. Yet small MPO and COG distributions, organizations like MetroPlan, we've been flat for 10 years. So the request is a $4.4 million increase to be distributed to small MPOs and COGs. It's basically 10% of the increase the state has experienced. And I've got a couple of graphs here to illustrate. And you know what, I'm going to just go past this graph. The point of this slide, the point of it is, and if you're looking at the big screen from the room, our text boxes are over a couple of the graphs. But the point is, small MPOs and COGs have not received any increase. But it gets really, and you go to the next slide, please. It gets very dramatic when you look at surface transportation block grant funding to ADOT over the past 10 years. And if those of you who can see this on your screen, I do want to just talk through this grant, even though there's a lot of bubbles on here, because it just really makes the point. 10 years ago, the funding that the state could spend anywhere was at 56 million. It went up to 88 million. So that's a $31 million increase. And then the next series of bars, this is funding to areas under 200,000 in population, areas like Flagstaff and Greater Flagstaff. That used to be 27 million a year. It's gone up to 36 million a year. So that's an $8 million increase. And then the next series of bars basically shows that the increase overall to ADOT for these surface transportation block grant funds is up by $40 million over 10 years. And again, for the folks in the room, our faces are over the last column, but those of you who can see it, okay, on your screen, it's really pretty simple math because the increase of small COGs and MPOs is 0. And sharing all this information because we just want to point out the equity of it and ask ADOT to do something to bring us into alignment. So how do we do that? And if you go to the next slide, please. It's not intended for you to be able to read this. This is a resolution approach we tried and have decided to simplify it. If you go to the next slide, the current approach, and again, you're not supposed to be able to read this letter, but the idea is to write a letter to Director Halikowski. We present all of this through staff. We give ADOT staff the opportunity to, do the right thing. And we have a consensus of the directors, all the folks in my position, including the folks in Maricopa County and Pima County, all of us at the state going to ADOT and saying, we want you to do this. We're asking you to do this. So I need to tell you that at 3 o'clock, I'm running out of this meeting because there is a meeting of the directors to consider this very request that starts at 2:30 today, but they're going to push it back on the agenda a bit so I can stay with you. But this one's really moving along and I'm hopeful we'll get some success with ADOT. Now I have more to share. But before I go on to some other grants, I just want to stop, Mr. Chairman, and see if there's any questions about this particular effort.
Any questions? I'm not hearing or seeing any, so go ahead.
Do you have a draft letter prepared, or is there something you're going to talk about?
I appreciate the question. The question is, do I have a draft letter? to share. The letter is supposed to come from all of the directors directly to ADOT.
Right,
So not something that comes to our boards.
okay.
Okay. All right, so will you please, Mandy, go to the next slide? And I can move a little bit faster here with an overview. Mandy is going to give an update on the Safe Streets for All grant a little bit later in this meeting. So here's a quick view of it. Next slide. Signal Technology Grant. This is one that I appreciate Dave putting a lot of time into. It was not funded last year, but we are going to, update it and pursue it again this year. Next slide. The Governor's Smart Fund. This is new. This is something just approved by the state. And MetroPlan can pursue this funding as well as our member agencies for local match, basically state funding to draw down federal grants. So this is a new one that we really need to keep our eye on. There's not a lot of definition on it yet, but it is $50 million statewide. Next slide. And then the RTAC initiative. This is the Rural Transportation Advocacy Council. I mentioned that the $50 million request last year, of which 2.6 million would have come for the Lone Tree Corridor. It was not successful. I want to point out that Council Member Salas is also Vice Chair of RTAC, and Supervisor Vasquez serves on RTAC. And Kevin Adam might be in the room, and although I'm not going to defer to him right now, I just want to recognize him and say that RTAC, Kevin, they're doing a lot to keep this thing going and make another and improved request in the coming year. Could you go to the next slide? And then there's an Inflation Reduction Act, and this is really a heads up. Within that act, there's $50 million for subgrants to units of local government to build capacity to deliver surface transportation projects. What that means is MetroPlan might want to look at developing the capacity to actually build stuff instead of just plan stuff. I'm not saying we want to do that, but I think it's something that strategically as an organization, we should look at in coming months. And then next slide. I think I'm ending with this one because it goes to clarity between agencies. And I'm going to use a different metaphor than baseball right now. It's important for MetroPlan to stay in our own lane and know what grants we're pursuing. And that's why I shared all this information with you today. We want to make sure we let everybody else know what we're doing. So directionals or hand signals. We want to know what's happening out there and follow the rules of the road, which are pretty complicated. All the administrative and bureaucratic processes and regulatory things we need to follow. And then we have a good map, right? So I shared today, things are changing so quickly. There are new funding sources that didn't exist officially just a couple months ago. And I put this little graphic up that's on the right side of the screen because this is how MetroPlan stays clear and focused. So inputs from staff go to the Technical Advisory Committee, all the member agencies represented here. And then they give us input and it goes to the Management Committee. So the city and county manager and NAPTA CEO. And then based on that input, we staff bring it to you, the executive board. You finally say, go do this and that, and then we go do it. And then that cycle just continues. So we're going to keep that flow going to keep communication flowing. And I believe that's the last slide. Except to say, next steps in discussion. We want to deliver on existing grants. We're going to pursue more grants. And then I thought this board might have some things they wanted to talk about. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, does anyone have any questions regarding state and federal funding? I'm not seeing any.
Mr. Chair, I don't see anything in the chat or any raised hands.
Okay. So, Miles, we're gonna next talk about item 3C, which is the possibility of hiring a couple new entry-level planners for Metro Plan, and how much that'll cost.
Yes.
You want to get into that?
Yes, and so it's up on your screen. Staffing becomes a strength is what I'm calling this presentation, and if you go to the next slide, this is in your staff report as well. I'm recommending that the board approve hiring 2 entry-level planner positions, an annual cost of $180,000, including benefits. And of course, it's contingent on adopting an amended budget. And that's our next item. So I've kind of broken these things out. But here, I'm going to make the case for the positions. So as I mentioned earlier, the weakness identified is that we don't have staff capacity to write grants and deliver projects. I shared in the last section how current staff are being repurposed to pursue funding and what we are pursuing. But now I want to talk about why we need more staff to deliver. Next slide, please. And, you know, I guess this is a little bit management philosophical, a couple of approaches. You know, we could definitely be more cautious. We could just make adjustments each year. We could hire staff only when long-term funding commitments can be made. Like we know we got funding for 5 or 10 years or indefinitely. And we could just hire consultants to avoid hiring staff positions that might be temporary. Or we could be a little more bold. And continue a 5-year plan and we could hire staff and make staff responsible for demonstrating their value, basically, continuing to bring grants in. It's more entrepreneurial in my mind. And we could hire staff rather than consultants when it makes sense. So we could build organizational capacity, retain institutional knowledge, and in some cases achieve better value. I want to be clear, we sometimes absolutely need and want consultants. The long-range transportation plan that you're going to see later in this meeting, we absolutely need and will continue to need consultants for that. But I'm going to make the case for 2 positions with grant funding that I think really fit. So next slide. Please skip past this one. That just says what we're already working on with existing staff. And you just heard that. But here we got 2 grants. So I'm suggesting hiring a staff person for a grant that's related to Creative Local Match. We received $160,000. And the reason for bringing somebody in is to keep the skills in-house. I believe it's faster and cheaper and more control than if we contract it out. And if we contract it out, once the work of some Creative Local Match plan is done, the consultant moves on too. And I want to bring somebody in. I think we can have somebody for 1.5 to 2 years, get this job done, and hopefully more funding will come in as a result, and they may be able to stay employed. And if they're not, that's okay. I feel like if we don't still need that position can go away. So that's one position. And then the next is the carbon funding, which is related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And we received a $320,000 grant. And I'm recommending we hire somebody to do a travel demand management program. So TDM, travel demand management, is about finding ways to use existing infrastructure more efficiently. And there are a lot of tools for that, and Dave and Dana are going to talk more about that in their Stride Forward update. But if you go to the next slide, I have a link that might work. Before you click on it, just in case it doesn't, just to say the simple statement here of, you know, travel demand management is the application of strategies and policies to just redistribute demand. So instead of building more infrastructure, we use the infrastructure differently and hopefully less through some of these tools. And let's try and click on this little 1-minute video. And if you'll bear with us, new room, new tech setup. Let's see if we can make it work. No sound.
Isn't there like an audio through computer option somewhere?
I hear no volume.
Yeah, and I actually just back on this. Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the board, rather than spend a lot of time making the tech work, I know it hurts the case a little bit that I'm making to try to hire a position. But I just don't want to get bogged down in the tech on that 1-minute video.
Yeah, Miles, why don't you just move on, but maybe you could email out to all the board members so we can look at it later.
I will do that. Thank you.
But continue your discussion.
Okay, so if Mandy, you could go to the next slide. Going to the budget item, the cost is $180,000. So basically entry-level positions with full benefits, that ends up being about $90,000 per position. And if the board is supportive of these ideas here, in this discussion, at the next item, I'm going to ask you to amend the budget. But right now, I just wanted to answer questions that the board might have and have discussion around, this concept of hiring these positions to do this work.
I have a couple thoughts, but let me open it up to the board. Does anybody have questions or comments or, support or no, we don't want this?
Yes, I do. This is Supervisor Vasquez. I'm
No,
calling.
go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, these positions, since they're grant funded, like in the county, we don't like to open up positions if we're not able to continue them beyond that. What's the plan with these positions? Should we approve them? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Vasquez, I hear the question, what do we do with these positions if the funding doesn't continue? And just in all candor, the positions don't continue. And that's why I laid out, this cautious approach or a more bold approach. And I think that hiring these positions in this way and telling the individuals, part of your job is to continue to write grants to ensure you continue to have a job, is bold. It's more entrepreneurial. It's maybe not typical for government organizations to do. And I will just say, as your executive director, I'm really comfortable with it. I like hiring entrepreneurial staff. And I think we have a good chance of them doing good work for us and us continuing on with efforts. But if they don't, to answer your question directly, if the money goes away, the positions go away. And that's the information I would give to the applicants as well.
Any other
Thank you.
comment?
No, I just wanted to say thank you. I just wanted that to be clear. So it's kind of known going up front and moving forward, with these positions. I support the idea of getting staff in this way. But I just wanted to make sure that all the members of the board had heard the plan moving forward, should we get these positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronald. Other comments? Well, I'll make a couple comments. Jeff, I support this. I think it's a little risky, but I think you got to put your best foot forward and plan for success. I think I anticipate that this will be successful and that people will be building our staff up internally. I mean, it's way better to use our resources to build our own staff and our capacity of our own staff than it is to, in effect, train consultants with our money, and then they move on to somewhere else. So I am supportive of this. I think it's a good idea. And I think you'll be able to get applicants, even if you're honest with them and say, hey, this may evaporate in a couple of years. This would look really good on the resume and help their career move forward, even if we aren't able to. And my guess is we will be able to expand the staff on the long term by getting more grants and by growing the organization. And to be honest, you did this at Mountain Lion. You were extremely successful at Mountain Lion to bring in amazing amounts of money to Mountain Lion. So I see your approach is similar to that, and I anticipate a lot of success. Other comments from board members?
Yeah.
Patrice raised her hand.
Yeah.
Patrice?
Patrice,
Yeah.
please go.
Yeah. Thanks, and I agree with what you've said, Jim, and also what Supervisor Vasquez said. And, you know, obviously, if we're trying to grow our own, we want to keep them. We don't want just the grant to run out. I mean, the whole idea, and I think the benefit of this is we are kind of growing our own and you know, really creating the expertise from within. So one of the things is we don't want to lose that. So I think it's really important that if we do go in this direction, and I do support it, that we also work very hard to make sure that that we're able to continue this funding. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Anyone
thank you
else?
Supervisor Horstman, and I see Councilmember Aslan has his hand raised.
Mr. Aslan, please go ahead.
Greetings from Glendale. Hey, everyone. Yeah, Miles, I'll keep this short. I'm fully in favor of moving forward with this. I'm glad to hear that there seems to be some consensus building with the rest of the board. It makes sense to keep this in-house, and you have a proven track record of making something like this work. I think it's a good investment, and I would even argue that it's not that risky. So thumbs up.
Any other comments?
I am in favor of it.
Okay, great. So just to streamline, to keep things moving here, I'll go ahead and make the motion. And I move that we approve hiring 2 entry-level planner positions at an annual cost of approximately $180,000, which includes benefits, contingent on adopting the amended budget, which incidentally is the next item after we finish this item. Did I get a second?
I'll second.
Actually, I do have a question.
Okay, so Tony Williams seconded, and then Mr. Aslan has a comment question.
Yeah, we're in the discussion phase at this point, right? So Miles,
Yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to understand better your sense of how these 2 hires will work. Will they be locally based here in Flagstaff? Will these be remote positions? Could the person hired be in Connecticut, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm pretty open. I would say my sense right now, though, and I've talked about this with staff and others on the technical advisory committee, the first position for creative local match, that position can really be anywhere. That's about doing research and crunching numbers and talking to other very technical people. It's not a whole lot about relationships. It's about putting something in place for more money to come in. So I think that position could be anywhere. I think that the travel demand management position is much more relationship based, and it's going to have a big role in outreach and education. And a lot of the credibility of the programs we put forth will really be tied to the credibility of the person who comes out with those messages. So that position will need to be here at some level. I would say, and part of this is just a recognition of the economy and the cost of housing in Flagstaff and the pay that this position is coming in at. I am open to the possibility that this job doesn't have to be 100% based here. The person could live somewhere else. They just have to be here. They have to be here. Sorry about that. My phone rang in the middle of my speech. They have to be here enough to do the job. And I think that means they're located here, but I just don't want to require it from the get-go. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Aslan?
Yeah, I was just, thinking in real time as we were getting ready to vote on this, that one of the intangibles is that we're creating jobs and providing income for folks here. But then I realized that's not necessarily the case. I don't think it affects my support at all. But I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts or desire to stipulate parameters on that. Maybe it's not necessary to micromanage it at that level. So I'll take my thoughts offline. Not that this is a radio show, but you know what I mean.
So just speaking for myself, not for the board, I think it'd be better if they lived here and built those relationships, but I think I'm open-minded about that. And we can discuss that in more detail before we actually, make a hire. Can we leave it at that for now? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we need to gum down the process at this moment with something so specific.
The record can show that Supervisor Horstman gave a thumbs up.
Okay. Any other comments before we take the vote? All right, we have a motion on the table. It's been seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
I,
Aye.
Hi.
Do we have any in opposition? All right, that motion passes without dissent unanimously. And Miles, now you're going to get into item 3D, which is some changes to the fiscal year 23 budget, which will tie right into what we just talked about. So Miles, go ahead.
Yes, it will, and thank you. I have the staff report up on the screen. And this is probably gonna be a pretty simple item since this just basically attaches the numbers to it and asks you to adopt the budget so that it's official. In the background on the staff report, I've talked through all of that already with where the funding's coming from and how we're going to spend it. And I would just go to, in the interest of time, the alternatives you have with the budget. And one is to amend it so that we can expend these grants, hire positions. The other is you can make some additional changes to the budget if you want to, or do not amend the budget. I gotta tell you, as I'm going through these staff reports, I tried to break it up to keep it simple. I think somehow I've made it more complicated, but I would ask you to humor me. And if you're, sounds like you're willing to adopt the budget, I'd ask you to take another vote here if you would.
We will. Any discussion before we take a motion? All right, so I'll move that we approve the amendments to the FY 23 budget as outlined in the packet.
I'll motion.
Okay, I moved and Mr. Vasquez, I'll count that as a second.
Okay, second.
Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Not hearing any, that passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Melbeck. Mr. Wessel, you are up next to talk about item 3E, which is Stride Forward updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the board, I'll be brief and transfer control over to our project manager on Stride Forward for Burgess and Nyepel. But I'll start by saying we are on budget, on task, on schedule. We have some exciting public events coming up that we want to talk to you about. And I've made a lot of progress on the assessment of our onward and upward concepts. And that's what Dana's going to present to you today. Look forward to sharing this information with you and answering questions after the presentation. So with that, happy to introduce Dana Biskin, and I believe she's going to share her screen and the presentation.
Thanks, Dave. Let me know when you can see my screen.
We can.
We can, and leave Liberty to reduce the images. There we go. Thank you.
Hold on
Go
one
ahead,
second.
go ahead.
All right, 1 second.
So while Dana's bringing this up, we've been doing a lot of, I'm getting feedback. We've been doing a lot of data analysis. She's going to present the results of that. many mile runs, and you can now see your screen, so.
Okay, great. I apologize. I feel this is probably a relatable challenge, but my computer, the motherboard got fried yesterday working on a different laptop and just needed to make a little adjustment. So apologize. So as Dave mentioned, we're going to give a quick review of the scenarios we've explored as part of Stride Forward, discuss the effectiveness of some of the strategies, discussion, and then talk about potential policy development and next steps. So just as sort of a reminder, with the Stride Forward RTP, Blueprint 2040 developed a list of projects, and those were funded through Prop 419 and 420. So we are exploring potential scenarios to help achieve the carbon neutrality plan goals. So Onward is essentially maintaining the status quo, staying the course with our existing transportation and land use plans, and it includes implementation of Prop 419 and 420, with some adjustments to make current projects as sustainable as possible. Upward provides more latitude, where we can deviate from the 419 and 420 projects. It does not have to be fiscally constrained. One of the requirements for a long range plan like this is that it does have a fiscally constrained scenario. So Upward allows us to explore beyond that, and look at changes in land use and things that are not necessarily presumed certain in the future as part of Onward. Both scenarios include the same population and employment estimates to have a more balanced approach in evaluating them. And both of them also include the hospital relocation. So as a reminder, these are the projects that are presumed included in the Onward scenario, 419 and 420. The carbon neutrality plan goals that we're looking to achieve through the Upward scenario include maintaining the vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, in the community in 2030 to 2019 levels. And that's the total versus per person. 30% of internal VMT through electric cars or other ZEVs, those zero emission vehicles. 54% of all trips taken by biking, walking, or taking the bus, and 34% of all work commute trips taken by those same modes by 2030. So when we run our analysis in the model, the Onward scenario essentially exceeds 2019 VMT by about 16.4%. So this slide is kind of a spoiler, but basically by evaluating different strategies, we are able to achieve a reduction in excess of that increase. So we're able to get a reduction of 16.9%, and we are able to maintain the 2019 VMT in 2030 through some pretty aggressive strategies. One of which was presuming that 50% of projected future development would be concentrated in target areas, 2.6% reduction, increasing the quantity and quality of the pedestrian and cyclist facilities by 400%, and of transit service by 200%, triggers about a 6% reduction, continuing the work from home trend, 3.1%, and implementing a travel demand management program, 5.2%. So just for context, when we talk about the VMT, you understand that's all the miles traveled in the region. When we talk about mode share, this is actually a pretty ambitious goal as well. You can see when we compare our peer communities, and this is pre-COVID numbers. Nationally, there has been a decline in transit use since COVID happened. So since we're being aspirational, we're going to compare to pre-COVID times. So some of the top communities kind of in our peer group combined would have had a 33.7%. Again, we're targeting 54% mode share between walking, biking, and transit. And in the onward scenario, kind of which is like our baseline starting point, we're at 14.5. So we are looking to more than triple a shift just from the status quo to transit, walking, and biking, and more or less 1.5 times our best performing peers pre-COVID. So it is a very ambitious goal. So you'll see this image several times. I mentioned the different strategies that were employed to achieve the VMT reduction targeted. This slide kind of demonstrates the relative effectiveness of different strategies. These are not cumulative. For example, if you combine priced parking, street connectivity, and density, and transit-oriented development, TOD, there on the far left, you're not going to take VMT to 0. So it is sort of the law of diminishing returns. The more you do, they're complementary, but you're not going to get the full benefit of any one strategy. And then also, certain things are more effective in some communities than others. This is kind of the best case experience nationally. So the first strategy we're going to talk through is the transit-oriented development and density. So we took 3 different potential land use scenarios to the advisory group and talked about how we could potentially concentrate future development to achieve a reduction in VMT. We looked at growth downtown, maybe growth split between downtown and 4th Street, and growth along Route 66. And in talking with that group and via our analysis, we selected the growth divided between downtown and 4th Street for assorted reasons. Essentially, the model performance was not too different between any of the scenarios, but this scenario puts less pressure on the downtown historic properties and on the 4th Street corridor. There's vacant land development, the redevelopment potential, and again, just a general preference from the other groups. So we've selected this scenario as I advance through the other slides. This is what we're talking about, intensifying density. So as we look at the impact of intensifying the density, onward again, compared to the VMT goal was 16.4% over, and you can see and the multimodal mode share associated with that was about 13%. So as you increase the amount of new development, essentially that's concentrated in those core areas, the VMT generated reduces, which makes sense because there's that increase in density. And similarly, there is an increase in the multimodal mode share. Now that said, the decrease is not tremendous. If there was only new growth in those core areas, which is the 100% growth shift, you'd get about a 3% decrease. And the reason that as a team that we've attributed that is in the next 10 years, there's not a lot of growth projected. So the influence of concentrating it isn't as dramatic. And to give a little bit more relative context, if you had that 80% concentration, that's, and Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 12 dwelling units per acre. So essentially picture 2-story, you would have to have a lot of 2-story buildings. So it's not that dramatic. The next strategy is basically a combination of other infrastructure related treatments. So this looks at bicycle and pedestrian improvements and transit improvements. So for bike and pedestrian improvements, it could be connectivity, system completeness, or enhanced crossings, transit improvements, and that LOS is level of service. But basically, it's just ways to enhance transit operations. So more stops, frequency, or routes. To help visualize that, The BRT for Route 10, I believe the stops are every 8 minutes. So if it was a 200% increase, it would be every 4 minutes in between stops. So with the 50% growth transfer, so that intensification of development downtown and 4th Street with the bicycle, pedestrian, and transit service improvements, if bike and ped service was improved 150%, approximately 12.9% over the VMT goal, with the multimodal mode share of about 17.3%. And as bike and ped service improves and BRT is added, and then again adjusted to transit service improvements, the VMT reduction is more pronounced with a more pronounced multimodal mode share. And for purposes of these slides, just for brevity, multimodal is intended to represent bike, ped, and transit. So again, kind of going back to that first slide, the spoiler would be with a 400% increase in bicycle and pedestrian facilities and a 200% increase in transit, you would have that 7.6 remaining, which can be offset by work from home and travel demand management. So that's kind of the sweet spot. If 80% growth were pursued, or 80% growth transfer, so the density, similar idea, increasing both and experimenting with BRT, but ultimately it would require a 300% increase in the bike and ped service. Transit also still 200% to be about the same as the 400-200 with the 50%. And just to share, when we reviewed this with the advisory group, they had a general preference towards the 50% density shift, feeling that it was more likely to be something that could be effectuated in the real world. And again, they also had a preference towards increasing the bicycle and pedestrian service at a greater proportion than transit, because more or less it's a one-time cost. Once those facilities are built and in place, they'll be there forever. So work from home and travel demand management. So work from home has really evolved since COVID. Basically at that point in time, we all sort of realized many jobs could be done from home. In the Flagstaff region, about 16% of VMT is attributable to work trips, and about 30% of all work trips, or 30% of all jobs, I apologize, could be done from home. Now, just because someone works from home doesn't mean that they don't leave their house. We often see trip chaining and things like that associated. So basically, if you go to work, you stop at the grocery store on the way home. So it is an effective strategy, but it's not as effective as it might appear at first blush. So based on kind of evolving research, we collectively identified about a 3.1% reduction in VMT that could be attributable to work from home. And then similarly with travel demand management, and this is a pretty broad menu of strategies. You can see there's about 10 items outlined. We felt another 5.2 based on national best practice research, things like that would be achievable. And this ties into what Miles was talking about earlier, looking to implement travel demand management programs. So again, you can see with the 50% intensification of land use in those target areas, you can achieve the VMT goal and can nearly achieve the multimodal mode share target from the carbon neutrality plan. With 80%, again, the VMT goal is achieved. Not as close on the multimodal mode share, but it was, again, a less aggressive, the 300% bike and ped service versus 400%. We did explore additional roadway connectivity. So again, trying to shorten trips for drivers, and about 16 miles of new roads. In this instance, it did not result in a very effective reduction. It was about 0.2% VMT reduction with our 80% intensification strategy. So other sort of observations is that work from home and transportation demand management can have a very large influence on the VMT in the region. And that the density shifts, kind of what we reviewed in the beginning, it's not as powerful as it appears that it could be from national research, but the reason is there's just not enough growth to make it as powerful. And some other tipping points, if severe congestion is allowed to occur, people take longer routes. So it's not a deterrent, it creates more VMT. A shift in density may attract people to take longer trips. And what that basically means is, let's say a very attractive commercial area is created, people may go out of their way to go there instead of staying, let's say, at the stores closest to their homes. And then also, when we were experimenting with land use, we tested to see what would happen if we focused on concentrating the residential growth in the intensification areas and allowed employment to maintain spread. And that actually helped reduce VMT, potentially because making sure there's jobs for the existing residents outside of those core areas so that they don't have to make such long trips. So based on all of this, we are anticipating developing draft policies and discussing them with members of the advisory group related to land use, bicycle pedestrian transit enhancements, travel demand management strategies, potentially curb management, electric vehicles, VMT policy considerations, and maybe some potential other items. So with that, are there any questions?
Any
A
questions?
lot of information.
Yeah,
A lot of information.
yeah. Dave, any follow-up comments or?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and, just for your information, do not see anything in the chat or hands raised. So some of the next steps that we'll be taking, obviously, Dana mentioned, policy development. But we'll also take some of the things that we've learned in our analysis to date and refine that upward concept. So where we've made kind of blanket improvements and assumptions about pedestrian and bike transit enhancements, we'll actually start targeting those to certain areas to see if we can refine that more closely with Mountain Line and information from their Flagstaff and Ocean process to do that. We'll also be developing costs associated with these. Again, working closely with Mountain Line. They've done a lot of cost analysis, and then working with Martin Ince and the city with the draft active transportation master plan. There's a lot of good data in there that we can build some cost information from. As I mentioned, we're going to be moving into another round of public involvement. We wrapped up a recent online survey and some feedback from our stakeholders. We'll be looking to schedule a virtual open house either later this month or early in October. And to take this material, we'll take some of the advancements that I just mentioned and add that to it, simplify it some. We understand that there's a lot of information. Can make it a little more simple for broader public digestion. And then the question that we wanted to put to you is, as part of this public outreach, we're looking to adopt the plan at your December 1st meeting, and would like to consider having a second virtual open house. It will be a live but virtual format like we have here today at our November 3rd executive board meeting. in order to accommodate that, consider starting at noon. So that's the question to you, I guess, and the broader question, right, if in terms of our approach moving forward, you're generally satisfied with that, and then, would you consider accommodating a noon start at our November meeting? Mr. Chair.
Thoughts from the board? About starting early and about just this whole presentation in general? I'm fine with starting an hour early. I guess how will this work? There's kind of like two recommendations. And then it'll be up to the city and the county and the other entities to decide, well, what are we gonna do? A lot of the stuff has to be implemented by the city and the county and the other organizations, as opposed to things that MetroPlan can actually do ourselves. Am I interpreting that correctly?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. It's an excellent point. And in the earlier slide, for those different strategies, Dana had identified, as you pointed out, Flagstaff and city, Flagstaff and the county being responsible.
Right.
So upward, we're going to be drafting policies that, should you continue to pursue this, these are policies that we would
That can
either
get you to
recommend,
goals, yeah.
as well as the costs associated with implementing those. So it's really information, and we anticipate that they'll take this information and use it in the regional plan update.
So,
We have one scenario here that we think is plausible for reaching the VMT goals. I expect the city will be reviewing several more, but they should be able to take what we've learned and apply that to that analysis, and we'll be in lockstep with them, supporting them with analysis and stuff for those different scenarios.
okay. Any other comments?
All this information also shared with NAU.
Yes.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman and or Mr. Thompson, just want to point out that NAU serves on our technical advisory committee, and they also serve on our management committee, so they're getting this information.
Good. All right, so we didn't have any action items, except that you would like to know if we'd be willing to come an hour early in November, was it?
In November.
Yeah,
3rd.
so I don't think we need to have a formal vote. I'd be fine with that. Mr. Thompson said he would be willing. Other board members, I see Patrice Horstman's head shaking. So I've got to assume that we can do that. I'm not seeing any negative comments. Mr. Williams, thumbs up, thank you.
And also, Councilmember Aslan.
And Mr. Aslan too. So I think we'll be good to start an hour early in November. Okay, I think we're done with this item. The next item is F, Safe Streets and Roads for All. And I'll just note that a revision to the agenda came out, I believe, yesterday. So we do have an action item on this, where before it was just going to be information. So Mandia Gonzalez, go for it.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair McCarthy and members of the board. So just as a reminder, this new safety plan will focus on pedestrians, bicyclists, and others outside of the vehicle, I should say. And the intent of this new safety plan is to save lives by reducing or eliminating serious injuries and fatalities for our most vulnerable road users. And since we last met, we have been working on the various application requirements and have conducted a high-level review of crash data from the Arizona Crash Information System. And a link to that data is provided in the staff report if you'd like to take a peek. We've also talked with city staff and Flagstaff Police Department to further educate ourselves and tell the story of these crash trends that we are seeing and the people who are being disproportionately impacted. Just a couple of reminders on this grant. There are two grant types available. There's the action planning grant, which is what we are pursuing right now. And then there's the implementation grant. And this is a competitive grant that's funded through fiscal year 26. So if we are unsuccessful this round, we will have opportunities in the future. I do want to share a question with the group that had come up both internally and externally. And that is, would a jurisdiction be eligible for implementation grants for projects identified in this new safety plan? And the best answer is yes. Essentially, if awarded and then the final plan is adopted by the executive board, then each jurisdiction under this pending plan would then be eligible for those implementation grants. So that's excellent news. So for our next steps, we are just continuing to finalize the application and the required documents and are in the process of collecting letters of support. And we should be submitting the application a couple of days early before the due date, and that due date is September 15th. So before I pass it back to the chair for the resolution, are there any questions?
No questions. So there's a resolution that was distributed by email yesterday. But in summary, what it says is that the board would approve a resolution authorizing MetroPlan to apply for a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant and to let the executive director to submit the application. So I'm in effect making the motion. Could we get a second on that?
Second.
All right, so Patrice Horstman seconded. Any discussion or questions? We could read the resolution verbatim, but I think it's basically the same as what I just read. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? I'm not hearing any, so that passes unanimously. Thanks, Sandy. I appreciate your work on this. So there's an example of a new staff person doing some good work.
Absolutely.
All right, we're down to item 3G, which is items from the MetroPlan staff. David Russell, I think you're going to take the lead on this. The first part of it. Anyway.
But only because Miles is not supposed to be.
I would like to do this. So the board knows, I thought I would have to step off at 2:30 for this other directors meeting I mentioned earlier, but since I'm here, I'll just take us through this. Items for MetroPlan staff. I know that you get the weekly report from me. There's a lot of stuff that's happening behind the scenes. You have a staff report that highlights some of these items. And since they're spelled out really in the staff report, I would just let you know they're there. And as you peruse them, if there's questions from anybody on the board, we can talk you through or go into some more detail. So otherwise, Mr. Chairman, I would just move to the next item. Oh, Dave.
Dave.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Director, if I could, I would like to add one to the list that was late breaking, not here. ADOT is conducting their freight plan and coming to a conclusion on that. We are looking to distribute funds somewhat according to what's known as the Casper Resolves, which is 50% funds going to Greater Arizona. And they would like to see a project up in our region. They have about $5 million available. Unfortunately, the projects that have been identified in our area include like I-40, I-17 improvements, interchange improvements, which are tens of millions, if not more, in terms of dollars. So I just want to bring this to your attention. We will be talking with local freight haulers and others, economic development folks, about opportunities they might know of for a $5 million improvement. And if something comes to your attention or you're aware of, please share that with me at your earliest convenience. So thank you.
Any comments or questions? Not hearing any. One of you guys is going to take the next item, future agenda items.
Yeah, and I'll do that again, Mr. Chair. Dave has pretty much already said this. In December, we are staying on track to come back with you and ask you to adopt the strike forward plan. And then in January, and this is just a reminder, every year The executive board, the TAC, need to do an annual orientation and a Title VI training. So Rosie will be doing that and just wanted to get it on your radar. And that concludes that item.
Okay. I'll just say real quickly that the agenda says the next meeting is October 1st. That's on Saturday. If you don't want to come in on Saturday, which I don't think I do, we're going to do that on October 6th is the actual date. So let's do items to and from the board. Any questions or comments? So I don't have any right now. Geronimo Vasquez, do you have any comments?
No, I don't. Thank you. Not at this time.
All right, thank you. Patrice Horstman?
Well, just that this is the weekend for the Coconino County Fair. It's 73rd anniversary of the fair, and of course, lots of fun, lots of animals, lots of the community out. So hopefully you can take some time this weekend and join us at the fair.
Thank you, Patrice. Austin Aslan?
Nothing for me right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Austin. Tony Williams?
Oh, no, nothing for me right now. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Regina Salas?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a couple of items. First, I want to lift up with immense gratitude, Mr. Miles, who's been doing a phenomenal job in leading the effort in that statewide coalitions of MPOs and COGS director, as he had reported earlier, in trying to bring 4.4 million to all MPOs and COGS for our respective organizations. So that's a Herculean task to coordinate with MAG and PAG and all MPOs and COGS director statewide. So thank you, Miles. And also in 2 weeks, Supervisor Vasquez and I are representing Metroplan in the upcoming Rural Transportation Summit at the Harris Acting, and I will be making a presentation on the experience of Northern Arizona entitled Convergence, Conveyance, and Catch Basins, how and illustrate the direct link of infrastructure, transportation infrastructure with regards to flood control, flood mitigation, forest restoration, and watershed protection. As we know that our region has been impacted by flooding due to post-fire burns, and we had to close 2 major highways, 180 and 89. So stay tuned, and hopefully, I'm not sure who else is going. I hope Supervisor Jesse will be there, and yeah, and I think of course Miles will be there too at the Rural Transportation Summit. So thank you all.
All right, thank you, Regina. Jesse Thompson?
The next meeting of the Transportation Board will be next Friday. What's next Friday? The following.
16th.
September 16th, they'll be in conjunction with the Rural Summit and Action Casino there. So, and I've really learned quite a bit about transportation planning, some of the professionalism that you have demonstrated in running these type of programs. And again, like first day or second, I said, all on there is dirt roads. No pavement, very limited pavement and all that, but it, it's very interesting. And being represent representing you on the board have been a pleasure to have done that. It's very difficult for, in this case, Native American tribes to really get into the kind of project that we're doing here and the kind of allocation that the state board makes to the various projects. Because there are layers of policies that a lot of our leaders were not sitting at the table and these policies were developed. And I'll be going out in December, term out. So it'll be probably be the Coconino County's turn to appoint somebody. So I'm gonna give them a heads up, and sometimes it takes quite a while for the counties to come up with the name. And this is what's going on with Steve Stratton. He's still joining us, even though he turned out last December, but he still continues to sit on. So anyway, I just want to give you a heads up, maybe if they don't appoint somebody, then I'll continue to serve until there's a replacement.
Okay, you can do that.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my comment.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you.
Well, last call, if anybody has any comments or questions, speak now or forever hold your peace, at least till next month on October 6th. Well, thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Regina. Wow, you got done in time.